At 11:42 p.m. on March 25, 1941, 19-year-old Mavis Lever sat in a freezing wooden hut in Buckinghamshire, staring at a sequence of letters that made absolutely no sense. She was a university student, recruited not for her mathematical skills, but for her ability to solve puzzles. She knew that if she failed to solve this puzzle, 3,000 British sailors were going to die within 48 hours. Mavis was the only resource standing between the Royal Navy and a strategic massacre. The war in the Mediterranean was on a knife edge. Britain was alone. The supply route to North Africa was the last remaining lifeline. If those convoys stopped, the war was over. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commanding the British fleet, was fighting blind. His ships were old. They were slow. They were outnumbered. Against him was a Regia Marina, the Italian Royal Fleet, modern, fast, and terrifyingly powerful. Their flagship, the Vittorio Veneto, was a monument to steel. 35,000 tons, 9 15-inch guns, 30-knot speed. It could destroy any British battleship and escape before the main fleet arrived. Cunningham knew the Italians were planning a decisive blow. The airwaves were loud with encrypted traffic. But the Mediterranean is 2.5 million square kilometers. Searching for the Italian fleet without intelligence was mathematically futile. The doctrine of naval warfare was clear. Concentration of force wins. Dispersion means death. To survive, Cunningham needed a miracle. He needed to read the Italian admiral's mind. But the Italians were using the Enigma machine. To the British Admiralty, the Enigma was an unscalable wall of probability. The machine used 3 rotating rotors and a reflector to change the electrical signal path with every single keystroke. A key pressed twice yielded 2 different letters. The number of possible combinations was 159 million, 159 followed by 18 zeros. If you tried to test one setting every second, it would take the age of the universe to check them all. The system was designed to be perfect. Admirals deemed it unbreakable. They ordered Cunningham to rely on binoculars. Inside Bletchley Park, in a small, drafty building known as a cottage, Mavis worked for Dilly Knox. Knox was an eccentric classic scholar, not a mathematician. He didn't care about rank or military doctrine. He looked at Mavis, a 19-year-old girl with 0 mathematical training, and asked her a simple, cold question. "Do you like crosswords?" Mavis said yes. "Good." Knox said, "Because the Italians are trying to hide a battleship in a crossword puzzle. Find it." For 6 months, Mavis had worked on the Italian cipher. It was complex, but it had one flaw. It was human. The machine was perfect. The mathematics were flawless. But the operator was not. The Enigma had no delete key. Starting over meant admitting a mistake and delaying the message. Operators developed shortcuts. They became lazy. Knox taught Mavis the fundamental truth. The machine is unbeatable, but the man operating it is an idiot. Mavis wasn't looking for the math. She was looking for the idiot. On that night in March, Mavis was analyzing a stream of intercepted messages. The traffic volume had spiked. Something massive was happening. If you want to see if Mavis can crack the code before the fleet sails, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. These heroes deserve to be remembered. Back to the cottage. Mavis had a stack of perforated sheets in front of her, lines of random letters. To anyone else, it was noise. To Mavis, it was a locked door. She was searching for a crib, a predictable piece of text. If you can predict just a few letters, you can work backward to find the wiring. She was scanning a long message sent from an Italian cruiser. She remembered something Knox had noted about the operator on the cruiser Pola. He was undisciplined. He was sloppy. Mavis looked at the message again. She tried lining up a phrase that had no tactical value. A phrase that was just polite. "Prego, Signor Commandante, please, Mr. Commander." It was a stupid choice for a military message, a violation of protocol. But Mavis suspected this operator valued politeness over discipline. She lined the phrase up against the ciphertext. She checked for crashes, places where a letter encoded to itself. The Enigma had one fatal design flaw. A letter could never be encrypted as itself. There were no crashes. The math of the letters fit the anomaly. It was a tiny, stupid thing. An operator being polite in a coded message of death. But if she was right, this simple phrase gave her the precise wiring of the rotors for the day. It gave her the key to the front door. She grabbed a pencil. She started calculating the rod pairing. It was manual, grueling work. She had to mentally mimic the machine's electrical path. 10 minutes later, she had a potential setting. She ran the rest of the message through the setting. The gibberish dissolved. Italian words appeared. Direzione, velocità, punto di incontro, direction, speed, meeting point. Mavis was reading the operational orders for the entire Italian battle fleet. The message detailed a massive attack. It gave the coordinates. It gave the timing. It confirmed that the Vittorio Veneto was sailing at dawn. It was a smoking gun. She stood up. Knox looked up from his desk. "I have it, Dilly," she said. Her voice was low and precise. "I have the fleet." Knox simply held out his hand for the paper. The easy part was over. Now they had to convince the Admiralty that a 19-year-old girl had found the Italian fleet because a sailor was too polite, and they had to do it before Cunningham sailed into the ambush. The mathematics of a mistake. Dilly Knox snatched the paper from Mavis's hand. He didn't offer praise or congratulations. He walked straight to the secure telephone on the wall, the direct line to the Admiralty in London. Time was the only currency that mattered. It was 12:14 a.m., March 26. The information Mavis had unlocked was the first piece of the puzzle. It detailed the Italian fleet's movements and confirmed that the Vittorio Veneto was sailing toward the island of Gavdos to hunt British convoys. Knox read the coordinates. Within minutes, the intelligence was encrypted again, this time in a highly secure British code, and beamed Alexandria, Egypt. Admiral Andrew Cunningham received the intelligence at 8 a.m. aboard HMS Warspite. Cunningham was a veteran. He had to weigh the risk. The intel was specific, but trusting it meant jeopardizing the entire ultra-secret. If the Italians learned their code was broken, they would change the machine setup, and Britain would go permanently blind. He chose to trust the intelligence, but he had to sell the deception. Cunningham had to move his fleet, while simultaneously convincing German spies in Alexandria that his ships were still anchored. His performance was cold and deliberate. He went ashore. He played a public round of golf. He invited the Japanese consul, who was known to be spying for the Axis, to a formal dinner that evening. He loudly complained about his luggage, saying he would not be traveling for weeks. He maintained the statistical probability of the code's safety by acting like a man on vacation. But under the surface, the machine was already moving. Boilers were being lit. Crews were silently recalled. At dusk, while the Japanese consul was still finishing dessert, Cunningham excused himself. He went straight to the docks, boarded the Warspite, and ordered the fleet to slip out of harbor in total darkness. 3 battleships, an aircraft carrier, destroyers, 30,000 men moving into the black Mediterranean night based on a code broken by a 19-year-old girl. Back at Bletchley Park, Mavis only knew the pressure. It was March 27th. The fleet was at sea. The Italians were out there somewhere. But the code had changed. The Italians changed their Enigma settings every day at midnight. The polite key Mavis had found yesterday was useless. The British fleet was sailing toward a rendezvous point that might have changed. If the Italians altered course, Cunningham would be sailing into empty water, wasting fuel, and exposing his slower ships to U-boats for nothing. Mavis had to break the day's traffic. Fast. She sat at her desk. The intercepts were piling up. Nothing made sense. The Italians had tightened their discipline. No polite greetings. Just cold, hard gibberish. And then the critical mistake happened. The Typo. At 11:30 a.m., an Italian radio operator on the cruiser Pola made an error. He was transmitting a routine status report. He typed the message, and the encrypted signal went out. But half a second after he finished, he realized he'd pressed a wrong key in a coordinate group. A disciplined operator would have changed the machine settings and sent a new message. That would have protected the code. But this operator was frustrated. He was lazy. He sent a follow-up message immediately. Correzione. Precedent. Group 4. And then he resent the exact same message, with the exact same machine settings, but with the one corrected letter. Mavis saw the 2 strips of paper land on her desk. Message A, message B. They were almost identical in length. They came from the same source. They were sent 2 minutes apart. In the world of cryptography, this is called a depth. It is the holy grail. When you encrypt 2 nearly identical messages with the same settings, the machine's masking effect cancels itself out. If you overlay them, the differences in the ciphertext reveal the differences in the plaintext. The operator's laziness, his stupid decision to fix a typo without changing the settings, stripped the camouflage off the Enigma machine. Mavis didn't need a crib. She didn't need a guess. The logic of the error gave her the wiring. She grabbed her pencil. Her mind raced through the permutations. The math crumbled. The rotors revealed their daily positions. In 20 minutes, she had the day's setting. She put the setting into her Typex machine and started typing the intercepted traffic. The letters printed out on the tape. She hit the jackpot. A message from the Vittorio Veneto itself. It wasn't just a location. It was a change of plans. The Italians had spotted a British cruiser squadron. They were turning. They weren't going to the rendezvous. They were turning to 270 degrees. They were trying to lure the British cruisers into a trap. If Cunningham continued to the old rendezvous point, he would miss the Italians entirely. The Vittorio Veneto would smash the British cruisers, escape, and the main British fleet would be miles away, shooting at nothing. Mavis looked at the clock. It was just after noon. Cunningham was sailing toward the wrong spot. She grabbed the paper. She ran. She burst into Knox's office. "They've turned," she announced. "The Vittorio Veneto has turned." Knox didn't react with emotion. He grabbed the decrypt. "Get this to London," he ordered. "Now." The message flew down the secure line. London relayed it to Warspite. Admiral Cunningham, receiving the message, barked an order. Hard A starboard. New course 270. Full speed. The massive hull of the Warspite leaned into the turn. 3 battleships changed direction in unison. They weren't hunting a ghost anymore. They were hunting a specific ship at a specific time because an Italian operator hadn't wanted to retype a message. But the Italians were fast. The Vittorio Veneto could do 30 knots. Cunningham's old battleships could barely do 24. Even with the new course, the math wasn't on Cunningham's side. He could chase them, but he couldn't catch them before sunset, unless something slowed them down. And Mavis had just provided the target. Cunningham picked up the radio. He called the aircraft carrier HMS Formidable. "Launch everything," he said. "Slow that battleship down." At 12:30 p.m., the flight deck of HMS Formidable was a scene of organized chaos. 6 Fairey Albacore torpedo bombers were being catapulted into the sky. These planes were mechanical jokes. Biplanes, made of canvas, wood, and wire. They were technologically obsolete. Their maximum speed was barely 160 miles per hour. They were flying into the guns of the largest battleship in the Mediterranean, but they carried an 18-inch torpedo. And thanks to Mavis Beatty, they knew the precise coordinates to deliver it. The problem was simple physics. Speed. The Vittorio Veneto was escaping at 30 knots. Cunningham's old battleships maintained 24 knots. The differential was 6 miles every hour in the Italians' favor. The ambush would fail by sunset. Cunningham didn't need to sink the battleship. He just needed to break its legs. The mission was suicidal. The albacores lifted off. They flew low, skimming the waves, hunting the coordinates Mavis had decoded. The sky turned black with anti-aircraft fire. Leading the attack was Lieutenant Commander Daley Elstead. He knew the odds. He pushed his throttle forward. The biplane shuddered. Flak ripped holes in the wings. He needed to get within 600 yards. The Italian gunners couldn't believe it. This crazy pilot was flying a canvas plane straight down the throat of the beast. They poured fire at him. At 600 yards, Daley Elstead dropped his torpedo. His plane was hit and disintegrated seconds later. He crashed into the sea. He died, so the fleet could catch up. It was a statistical trade. The torpedo ran true. It hit the Vittorio Veneto on the stern, port side. The explosion was colossal. 450 pounds of torpex detonated against the propeller shaft. The battleship shuddered. 35,000 tons of steel bucked like a kicked horse. The engine stopped. The pride of the Italian Navy drifted to a halt. Back at Bletchley Park, Mavis was reading the panic. The intercepts were frantic. Hit astern, engines stopped, taking on water. She typed the translation. Her expression was neutral. She handed the slip to Knox. Target stationary. But Italian engineering was good. Within an hour, they managed to restart the starboard engines. The Vittorio Veneto began to limp. She couldn't do 30 knots anymore. She could do 19 knots. Cunningham did the math again. 24 knots chasing 19. The differential was now 5 knots in the British favor. The gap was closing. The trap was still possible. But Admiral Angelo Iacchino, commanding the Italian fleet, made a catastrophic decision. A decision based on doctrine, loyalty, and a fatal lack of information. Iacchino didn't know Cunningham was 50 miles behind him. He thought the only threat was the fragile biplanes. He had no radar to scan the horizon. He believed the attack was over. He couldn't abandon his flagship. Doctrine demanded protection. He ordered his heavy cruisers, the Pola, the Zara, and the Fiume, to turn back, to form a protective shield around the wounded Vittorio Veneto while she limped home. It was a noble order, a demonstration of human loyalty and naval doctrine. Never leave the flagship. It was also a death sentence for 2,300 men. By ordering his best cruisers to turn back, Iacchino was sending them straight into the jaws of Cunningham's battleships. He was concentrating his forces in the exact spot where the British had targeted them. Mavis saw the order cross her desk at 7:15 p.m. Supermarine to 1st Cruiser Division. Invert course. Assist Vittorio Veneto. She stared at the paper. She didn't react with fear. She reacted with cold, procedural certainty. She was looking at a tactical exploitation. Human loyalty was being used as a tactical advantage. Dilly Knox looked at the map. He moved the pins. 3 red pins, the cruisers, moving east. 3 blue pins, the British battleships, moving west. The sun was setting. 7:30 p.m. The Mediterranean night was pitch black. No moon. Visibility was 0. The British fleet ran silent. They used no radio. They showed no lights. They were ghosts. The Italian cruisers, Pola, Zara, Fiume, were clustered in the dark. Their captains were scanning the horizon with binoculars. They saw nothing. They were unaware. They had no idea that 15-inch guns were being trained on them from 3,800 yards away. On the bridge of the HMS Warships, the gunnery officer checked the radar range. 3,800 yards. Point-blank range for a battleship. At this distance, hitting the target was a mathematical certainty. Cunningham stood on the bridge. He looked at the dark shapes of the Italian cruisers on his radar screen. They were sitting ducks. It wasn't a battle. It was going to be a demolition. Cunningham picked up the microphone. He looked out into the absolute blackness. He could hear the low thrum of the engines. "All ships," he said, "open fire." The mathematics of execution. At 10:27 p.m., the darkness of the Mediterranean was ripped apart by light. The terror began when the shutters on the HMS Greyhound's searchlights snapped open. Beams of white light, millions of candle power strong, cut through the night. They hit the Italian heavy cruiser Fiume like a physical, blinding blow. The sailors on deck froze. They were looking at the light, blinking, confused. They did not see the ships. They did not see the enemy. They only saw the light. Then came the sound. The HMS Warships fired. 8 15-inch guns. Each shell weighed 1,938 pounds, the weight of a small car. They were traveling at 1,600 miles per hour. The distance was 3,800 yards. In naval terms, this is unavoidable. It took 6 seconds for the shells to cross the water. The Italian sailors on the Fiume had exactly 6 seconds to realize they were dead. The salvo hit. The impact was total. The Fiume didn't just explode. It disintegrated. The 15-inch shells punched through the cruiser's thin armor like tissue paper. They detonated deep inside the engine rooms and magazines. The entire aft turret was ripped off the ship, spinning into the sea. The ship broke in half instantly. Simultaneously, the HMS Valiant opened fire on the Zara. The Zara was hit by 5 shells in her broadside. Her boilers exploded. Her upper deck was swept clean of human life by the blast pressure alone. It was not a battle. It was a demolition. The Italian guns were still trained fore and aft. They hadn't even rotated their turrets. They never fired a single shot in return. They died because they were blind. The British battleships reloaded. 30 seconds later, they fired again. The noise was a continuous, deafening roar. In 3 minutes, 180 seconds, the Reggio Marina lost its best cruisers. The Fiume was gone. The Zara was a burning wreck. The Pola, drifting nearby, watched the execution in horror. Admiral Cunningham ordered a ceasefire. The smoke was too thick to see. The destruction was complete. He ordered the fleet to turn away, vanishing back into the dark. Back at Bletchley Park, the mood in the cottage was surgical. Mavis sat at her desk. The intercepts were coming in again, but they weren't operational orders anymore. They were distress signals. She transcribed the messages in her precise, disciplined hand. Zara sinking, fire in the magazine, abandoned ship, Fiume lost, save U.S. She translated them one by one. She was looking at men drowning in oil-slicked water. She was looking at 2,303 confirmed deaths. The consequence of her solution was horrific, efficient, and complete. She had done this. Her typo trick, her pattern recognition. It had led the British fleet to this exact spot, at this exact minute, to achieve this exact result. She had proven that a student with a pencil could be more lethal than a battleship. By dawn on March 29th, the destruction was confirmed. The Battle of Cape Matapan was the most lopsided naval victory since Trafalgar. The Italian Navy was broken. They never challenged British control of the Mediterranean again. They blamed radar. They blamed spies. They never suspected that a failure of human discipline in an Italian radio room had led to their statistical collapse. Admiral Cunningham did something unprecedented. He sent an uncoded radio signal to the Italian High Command. He gave them the coordinates of the survivors and asked them to send hospital ships. It was a cold act of calculated humanity. He was sure the job was done. But the war wasn't over. Mavis went back to work the next day. There were more codes, more puzzles, more work to be done. By late 1941, the stakes escalated. Dilly Knox called Mavis into his office. He was no longer the witty professor. He was a dying man, ravaged by cancer. They say the Abwehr machine can't be broken, Knox wheezed. They say it's mathematically impossible. They say we have zero chance. The new threat was the Abwehr Enigma Model G, used by Hitler's Secret Intelligence Service. It had 4 rotors and moved with a chaotic, irregular rhythm. It was designed to be random. There were no polite operators to make typos. If Matapan was a test, this was a final, critical exam. The Abwehr Enigma controlled the movements of German panzer divisions. If the Allies couldn't read those messages, the invasion of Europe, D-Day, would fail before it even started. Knox looked at Mavis, the girl who broke the code using courtesy. They rely on the perfection of the machine, he whispered. You rely on the flaw in the logic. Break it, Mavis, or the invasion fails. This time, she would not have a typo to save her. She would have to defeat the machine itself. The Abwehr Enigma was the ultimate cryptographic challenge. The machine, known as the Model G, was the antithesis of the predictable Italian version Mavis had broken. It had 4 rotors, and they didn't click like a mileage counter. They moved with a chaotic, irregular rhythm. The gears had complex notches that caused them to skip, stall, and jump. It was designed to be mathematically random. British intelligence had given up on it. The official assessment was unbreakable. They saw 0 chance of reading messages used by Hitler's spies. But Dilly Knox would not accept unbreakable. He lay in his bed, his body failing, but his mind sharp. The machine talks, Mavis, Knox whispered. They tried to hide the pattern by making it chaotic. Find a flaw in the logic of the chaos. Mavis went back to the cottage. She wasn't looking for typos. German spies were disciplined. Their messages were short, cold, precise. She had to break the machine, using pure logical force. She spent weeks staring at the internal wiring diagram she was constructing in her head. She was trying to reverse engineer a machine she had never seen, based only on the scrambled nonsense it produced. She realized the German engineers had been too clever and tried to make the machine appear random. They had introduced a subtle, repeating bias in how the rotors dragged each other. The drag wasn't random. It was mechanically predictable. Mavis isolated a single message. She assumed a starting position. She calculated the drag. She tested the wiring hypothesis. It clicked. She found the wiring of one of the rotors. It was a critical, repeating thread. She pulled it. The entire system unraveled. She broke the Abwehr enigma, not with a capture machine, not with a typo, but with a pencil and a brain that saw patterns where chaos was intended. She rode her bicycle to Knox's house. She told him the wiring was solved. Knox smiled. It was the last victory he would ever see. He died shortly after, the eccentric genius gone, but the knowledge preserved. Mavis, now 20 years old, was the lead cryptanalyst for the ISG section. She was reading Hitler's personal mail. The timing was critical. The Allies were planning to invade Sicily, but Sicily was obvious. German defense was concentrated there. If the Allies landed, 40,000 men would die. The Allies needed a trick, a deception. They came up with Operation Mincemeat. The plan was insane. They took the body of a homeless man, dressed him as Major William Martin, and handcuffed a briefcase to his wrist. Inside the briefcase were fake top secret letters claiming the Allies were invading Greece and Sardinia. They dropped the body into the sea off the coast of Spain, hoping the Spanish, who cooperated with Nazi spies, would find the briefcase, and hoping the Germans would believe the lie. The Allies launched the body. The Spanish found it. But then came the terrifying silence. Did the Spanish show it to the Germans? Did the Germans read the letters? Did they believe them? Churchill paced. Eisenhower waited. Nobody knew the success of the operation, except Mavis Beatty, because Mavis was reading the Abwehr traffic. She was monitoring the critical link between Madrid and Berlin. She was the only person in the world who could confirm if the lie had worked. May 14, 1943. A message intercepted from Madrid to Berlin. Top priority. Mavis sat at her desk. The Typex machine clattered. She translated the German text as it appeared. From Quilental, senior German spy in Spain, to Berlin Intelligence HQ. She typed the key lines. Intelligence is genuine. Allies targeting Greece and Sardinia. Mavis leaned back. They bought it. They swallowed the bait hook, line, and sinker. She tracked the traffic all the way to the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters. She read the order Hitler sent back. Move Panzer divisions to Greece. Fortify Sardinia. Abandon Sicily defenses. It was the most devastating intelligence coup of the war. Mavis Beatty watched in real time as Adolf Hitler moved 18 divisions, thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of men away from the real invasion site. She typed up the report. It was sent to Churchill. Churchill sent a 2-word telegram to the commanders, mincemeat swallowed. On July 9th, 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily. They expected a wall of steel. They found empty beaches. The Germans were in Greece, waiting for an invasion that never came. Casualties were light. The Allies took the island in weeks. The collapse of Mussolini's regime followed. The soft underbelly of Europe was ripped open. Thousands of Allied soldiers who should have died on those beaches walked ashore safely. They were alive because of a dead man in the water. And they were alive because Mavis Beatty had confirmed that the coast was clear. But the largest operation still lay ahead. D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. Hitler knew it was coming. He had his best divisions waiting in Calais. If those panzers moved in Normandy, the invasion would be crushed. The Allies needed another lie, a bigger one. This was Operation Fortitude, the army of inflatable tanks, the fake radio signals, the double agents. General Eisenhower needed to know what Hitler was thinking. He needed a window into the mind of the German High Command. And on June 4th, 1944, 48 hours before D-Day, Mavis Beatty handed him the final piece of the puzzle. The ultimate prize of Mavis Beatty's work was the invasion of Europe. D-Day. Hitler knew the invasion was coming. He had the Panzer divisions waiting in Calais. If those divisions moved to the real invasion site in Normandy, the Allied forces would be crushed on the beaches. The lie, Operation Fortitude, had to hold. General Eisenhower needed one final piece of intelligence. He needed to know what the smartest German commander, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, was thinking. On June 4th, 1944, 48 hours before the invasion, Mavis intercepted a critical message from Rommel to Berlin. She ran the Abwehr cipher, and the German words appeared. Rommel returning to Germany for wife's birthday. Weather bad. Invasion unlikely. Mavis reread the translation. Rommel was leaving. He was abandoning the Normandy defenses. He thought the weather was too poor for an invasion. He had statistically failed to believe the intelligence Mavis had tracked for the past year. Eisenhower received the intercept. The German defenses were leaderless. The panzers were looking the wrong way. The deception was holding. We go, Eisenhower ordered. On June 6, 1944, Mavis Beatty was in the cottage. She heard the roar of planes flying overhead. Thousands of them. She knew the success of D-Day had been cleared by her code breaking. She knew the Italian fleet was at the bottom of the sea, and the German panzers were in the wrong place. She was 23 years old. She had sunk a fleet, fooled a dictator, and opened the door to Europe. The war ended on May 8, 1945. V-Day. But there was no cheering at Bletchley Park. There was only the sound of shredders and fire. The order had come from the highest levels of the British government. Destroy everything. The logic was cold. The British government didn't want the Soviets or anyone else to know that Enigma had been broken. The most successful information warfare operation in history had to be buried. Mavis watched as thousands of transcripts were burned. The records of the Italian fleet. The intercepts from Hitler, the evidence that a 19-year-old girl had outsmarted the Axis powers. All of it turned to ash. Then came the final instruction, the Official Secrets Act. Mavis was told, in no uncertain terms, that she had never worked there. She had never broken a code. She had never sunk a ship. If she spoke of it to her family, to her friends, it would be treason. She signed the paper. The silence was enforced. She walked out the gates of Bletchley Park. She was just a civilian with a massive, terrifying secret. She married Keith Beatty, a fellow codebreaker. They had a unique marriage. They both knew the truth, but for decades, they barely spoke of it. The habit of silence was too deep. They moved on. Mavis raised her children. She worked as a mathematics teacher. When people asked what she did during the war, she lied. She stuck to the cover story. I was a secretary. I filed papers. Very boring. Her children grew up thinking their mother was just a nice lady who liked gardening and history. They had no idea she was the deadliest cryptanalyst of World War II. For 30 years, the history books were written wrong. Historians wrote about the Battle of Matapan. They said Admiral Cunningham was a genius who guessed the Italian movements. They credited radar and superior technology. They credited the machines. They credited the generals. They never mentioned the girl with the pencil. Mavis read these books in her living room. She knew the truth was wrong. She knew the thousands of lives that had been credited to luck were actually saved by the statistical anomalies she exploited. But she said nothing. The oath held. She watched movies about the war. She saw actresses playing helpless women waiting for their men to come home. She knew her role. The one who saved the men was not allowed on screen. In 1974, the dam finally broke. Group Captain F.W. Winterbotham published a book called The Ultra Secret. The silence was officially lifted. Reporters tracked Mavis down. She was a grandmother now. She made them tea. And then, for the first time in 3 decades, she told the truth. She told them about the polite operator. She told them about the Typo. She told them about Dilly Knox. The world finally knew her name. But the military establishment was slow to honor the amateurs of Bletchley Park. But the veterans remembered. Old sailors wrote letters to her. Men who had served on the HMS Warspite or the HMS Formidable. One letter came from a man who had served on a convoy to Malta. He wrote, "We knew something was protecting us. We just knew that the Italian battleships never showed up when they were supposed to. Now I know it was you. Thank you for my life." Mavis kept those letters. They meant more than medals. But there was one final battle to fight. After the war, Mavis Beatty dedicated herself to preserving the truth. Her final battle was not against fascism, but against statistical obsolescence. By the 1990s, Bletchley Park was falling apart. The cottage was full of mold. Developers wanted the land. Their math was simple: land value, historical memory. They planned to bulldoze the site and build a supermarket and a housing estate. It was a logical move for a developer. It was a statistical tragedy for the world. Mavis stepped in. She was in her 70s now, but the fire was still there, the stubbornness that broke 2 Enigma ciphers. She launched a campaign. She used her ultra-clearance status not to boast, but to publicly shame the government into action. "This is not a housing estate," she told the city council. "This is the birthplace of the modern world. The computer was born here. The war was won here. You cannot erase the memory of the invisible army for a supermarket." She was fighting with information. She argued that Bletchley Park wasn't just British history. It was world history. The developers backed down. The government intervened. Bletchley Park was saved. It became a museum. Mavis won the final fight. She saved the physical proof of her own history. Today, if you visit, you can see the cottage. You can walk into the room where Mavis sat. It looks exactly as it did in 1941. But Mavis didn't do it for the museum. She did it for the ghosts, for Dilly Knox, for the thousands of girls who worked in those freezing huts and never told their husbands what they did. Mavis Beatty died on November 12, 2013. She was 92 years old. The obituaries were respectful. The BBC called her a codebreaker. The Times called her a Bletchley heroine. But none of the headlines truly captured the scale of what she actually did. They didn't capture the sheer, terrifying math of it. Think about the chain of consequences. A single operator's lack of discipline, the Typo, allowed Mavis to find the key. That key allowed Admiral Cunningham to sink 5 warships and break the Italian Navy. That victory protected the Mediterranean and allowed the Allies to focus on the next step. Mavis then broke the Abwehr Enigma, allowing her to confirm the lies of Operation Mincemeat and Operation Fortitude. This confirmation led Hitler to move 18 Panzer divisions away from Sicily and Normandy. The result: thousands of Allied soldiers who should have died on the beaches walked ashore safely. The war was shortened by an estimated 2 years. It sounds like an exaggeration. It sounds like a movie script. But the numbers do not lie. And Mavis Beatty never lied about the numbers. She was one of the first hackers in history. She hacked the human mind. She understood that technology is only as strong as the person operating it. She proved that the most sophisticated encryption in the world can be defeated by a single moment of laziness, a single typo. The most dangerous weapon in World War II was not the atomic bomb. It was not the 15-inch gun. If you visit the Central Museum of the Armed Forces in Moscow, you can see Ludmila Pavlichenko's rifle. If you visit Fort Benning, you can see Marcus Holland's helmet. But if you visit Bletchley Park, you can see Mavis Beatty's desk. And on that desk, there's a simple yellow chewed-up pencil. That pencil sank 5 warships. That pencil fooled Hitler. That pencil saved the invasion of Europe. Most history books will list the admirals. They will show you the maps with the big arrows. But the arrows on a map only moved because a girl in a cardigan solved a puzzle in a freezing hut. You don't need to be a general to change the course of history. You just need to be paying attention when everyone else is asleep. Mavis Beatty was paying attention. She saw the typo that everyone else missed. And because she did, the world is free. And now you know her name. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It helps us rescue heroes like Mavis from the silence. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are digging through the archives every single week to find the people who change the world with stupid tricks and illegal ideas. And drop a comment below. Tell us you are here. You are not just a viewer. You are a history keeper. By watching this, you are keeping her memory alive. Thank you for making sure Mavis Beatty doesn't disappear into the static.